The ancient Romans had a name for this stretch of southern Arabia: Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia, or Fortunate Arabia, a title given to no other part of the peninsula. They gave it that name because this land, unlike the vast empty desert surrounding it, was fertile, mountainous, well-watered by monsoon rains, and sitting directly on top of one of the most valuable trade commodities in the ancient world. For centuries, this was one of the richest, most sought-after regions on Earth. Today, most people know this country by a very different reputation. Yemen appears in the news almost exclusively as a byline for war, famine, and humanitarian catastrophe. And for more than a decade now, that description has been tragically accurate. But almost nobody outside the region ever hears the rest of the story. The empires, the architecture, the biodiversity, and the sheer depth of history sitting underneath the headlines. Both versions of Yemen are true at the same time. This is the fuller picture. Start with the map. Yemen sits at the southwestern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, bordered by Saudi Arabia to the north and Oman to the east, with coastline running along both the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It sits directly across from the Horn of Africa, separated by the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, one of the most strategically important shipping choke points on the planet, funneling a huge share of global maritime trade between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean through a gap barely 30 kilometers wide. The population sits at roughly 40 million people, and the geography beneath them is far more varied than the flat desert imagery most outsiders assume. Yemen holds genuine mountain ranges, with peaks reaching over 3,600 meters, the highest points on the entire Arabian Peninsula, alongside fertile highland valleys that have supported agriculture for thousands of years, arid coastal plains, and a desert interior bordering the vast empty quarter shared with Saudi Arabia and Oman. That terrain has shaped Yemeni society in a way flatter Gulf neighbors never experienced. Steep, defensible mountain valleys allowed local tribes and city-states to maintain a degree of independence from centralized rule for centuries longer than would have been possible on open desert plains. And that same terrain is a large part of why Yemen developed such a distinct patchwork of regional dialects, architectural styles, and local identities rather than the more uniform national culture found in some neighboring states. The mountains that once protected ancient trading kingdoms from outside conquest are, today, some of the same terrain, making the current conflict so difficult to fully resolve. Hard to hold, harder still to fully control. Now, the part almost nobody expects. Long before Islam, long before the Roman Empire even reached the Mediterranean's eastern edges, this region was home to a series of sophisticated ancient kingdoms built on a single extraordinarily valuable resource: frankincense and myrrh, aromatic resins harvested from trees that grew almost nowhere else on Earth in commercial quantity. These weren't minor luxury goods. Frankincense and myrrh were burned in temples and used in religious rituals across the ancient world, from Egypt to Rome to the Levant, and Yemen, along with parts of neighboring Oman, controlled a huge share of the global supply. The Kingdom of Saba, better known to most of the world as Sheba, rose to prominence on the back of that trade. And Yemeni tradition identifies this land as the home of the Queen of Sheba herself, the legendary ruler described in the Hebrew Bible and the Quran as traveling to meet King Solomon. Whatever the precise historical truth behind that specific story, the Sabaean kingdom that inspired it was real, wealthy, and sophisticated enough to construct the Marib Dam, an enormous irrigation structure built around the 8th century BCE that channeled seasonal floodwater to sustain agriculture across the surrounding region for well over 1,000 years, supporting a population and civilization that punched dramatically above what the surrounding desert should have allowed. Saba wasn't the only power in the region either. Neighboring kingdoms like Qataban, Hadramaut, and Himyar rose and fell across the centuries that followed, each controlling different segments of the incense trade routes running up through Arabia toward the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. Himyar eventually absorbed much of the peninsula's south under a single rule by the 3rd century CE, becoming one of the more religiously significant kingdoms of late antiquity, a period during which Judaism and later Christianity both gained meaningful footholds in the region well before Islam arrived, leaving a religiously layered history that predates the modern, almost entirely Muslim character of the country by centuries. Hold on to that timeline, we will get there. Here is a fact that says more about Yemen's ancient significance than almost anything else. The Romans eventually learned to exploit the monsoon winds to sail directly between Red Sea ports in southern Asia, cutting the incense trading kingdoms out of their overland monopoly and beginning a long, slow decline in the region's ancient wealth. By the time Islam emerged in the 7th century CE, Yemen had already lived through the rise and fall of multiple sophisticated pre-Islamic kingdoms, leaving behind temple ruins, dam engineering, and a written South Arabian script that predates the Arabic alphabet used across the region today. Islam spread across Yemen quickly after the 7th century, and the region went on to be governed at various points over the following centuries by a rotating cast of local dynasties, including the Ayyubid and later Rasulid rulers, who left behind mosques, madrasas, and fortified hill towns whose architecture remains distinct from anything else in the Arab world. Tall, multi-story tower houses built from rammed earth and mud brick, some rising 6 or 7 stories, decorated with elaborate white gypsum trim around the windows, an architectural style found almost nowhere else on the planet at this scale. The most striking example of that building tradition sits in the eastern Hadramaut region, the walled city of Shibam, sometimes nicknamed the Manhattan of the desert, where roughly 500 mud brick tower houses, some dating back to the 16th century and rising as high as 11 stories, cluster tightly together inside a single defensive wall. It remains to this day one of the oldest and most complete examples of vertical urban planning anywhere in the world, built centuries before the term skyscraper existed anywhere else on Earth, using nothing more than mud, straw, and water as raw materials. By the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had incorporated Yemen into its territory, while the British, expanding their control over Indian Ocean trade routes, established a foothold in the southern port city of Aden in the 19th century, turning it into one of the busiest coaling and shipping stations in the entire British Empire. That split, Ottoman-influenced north, British-controlled south, planted the seeds of a division that would shape Yemeni politics for the next century. Yes, this is the part the title promised, and it's also where the story starts turning heavier. In 1962, a revolution overthrew the centuries-old religious monarchy in the north, establishing the Yemen Arab Republic after a bitter civil war that drew in Egyptian and Saudi intervention on opposing sides. The South, meanwhile, gained independence from Britain in 1967, briefly becoming the only Marxist state in the Arab world under the name People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. Two separate Yemens with two different political systems existed side by side for over 2 decades. In 1990, North and South Yemen unified into a single Republic of Yemen, a genuinely significant moment of Arab political reunification that briefly made global headlines for entirely positive reasons. But that unification never fully resolved the underlying regional, tribal, and political tensions between North and South, and those unresolved fractures would resurface violently just over 2 decades later. Here is where the armchair daydream becomes a spreadsheet, and where this story stops being ancient history. In 2011, Arab Spring protests spread to Yemen, forcing longtime President Ali Abdullah Saleh from power after more than 3 decades in office. The transition that followed was fragile from the start, and by 2014, the Houthi movement, an armed group rooted in Yemen's Zaidi Shia minority in the north, formerly known as Ansar Allah, took control of the capital, Sana'a, triggering a civil war that is now stretched on, in one form or another, for more than a decade. A Saudi-led military coalition intervened in 2015 to try to restore the internationally recognized government, backed at various points by the United Arab Emirates and other regional partners, while the Houthis received support from Iran. What followed became, by the United Nations' own assessment, one of the worst humanitarian crises anywhere in the world. Years of bombing, blockade, and ground fighting pushed millions of Yemenis to the brink of famine and triggered the largest cholera outbreak recorded in modern history. Estimates from around 2021 placed the war's death toll above 375,000 people, counting both direct casualties and the indirect toll of collapsed healthcare, sanitation, and food systems. More than 4 million people remain internally displaced today, many of them for the better part of a decade, with children in some areas having known nothing but conflict their entire lives. The southern secessionist dimension of the conflict adds another layer most outside coverage tends to skip entirely. The Southern Transitional Council, formed in 2017, seeks to reverse the 1990 unification and re-establish an independent southern state, meaning Yemen's war was never a simple two-sided fight, but a multi-front struggle involving factions that are nominally allies against the Houthis while periodically fighting each other over the country's future shape. A UN-brokered truce in 2022 reduced the intensity of frontline fighting between the main domestic factions, and for a period afterward, the conflict lines settled into an uneasy, largely frozen stalemate. But quieter has never meant over. Since late 2023, Houthi forces have launched repeated missile and drone attacks on international shipping through the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandab Strait, framed as actions in solidarity with Gaza, drawing military responses from the United States and allied forces and effectively pulling Yemen's conflict into a much wider regional confrontation. Israeli airstrikes have hit targets inside Houthi-controlled Sana'a, including strikes in 2025 that damaged the city's National Museum and parts of its historic Old City. Fighting between Yemen's internationally recognized government and the separatist Southern Transitional Council has also flared again in the south. As of 2026, Yemen remains a country still actively at war on multiple fronts at once, not a conflict quietly winding down in the background. But here is the pivot, because the full picture matters more than the headline catastrophe. Yemenis have continued, throughout all of this, to protect and document what remains of their cultural heritage under extraordinarily difficult conditions. Local historians, engineers, and heritage specialists have worked to catalog damage to sites like the Kahira Castle in Taiz and the Old City of Sana'a, a UNESCO World Heritage Site whose distinctive tower houses have stood, in some cases, for close to 1,000 years, even as war has damaged parts of it. That determination to preserve what the war hasn't already destroyed is its own quiet form of resilience, carried out largely without international attention or resources. If you have made it this far, and you are watching a difficult story like this one, a like and a subscribe genuinely help more people learn about a country the news cycle mostly moved on from years ago. The economic picture underneath all of this is as grim as the humanitarian statistics suggest. Yemen was already the poorest country on the Arabian Peninsula before 2014, and more than a decade of war has devastated whatever economic base existed. Oil and gas exports, once a meaningful source of government revenue, have been repeatedly disrupted by conflict and blockade. The national currency has lost the vast majority of its value in Houthi-controlled areas. Inflation has made basic goods unaffordable for huge segments of the population, and the country remains heavily dependent on international humanitarian aid just to keep millions of people fed. The World Food Program and other agencies have warned repeatedly over the past several years of famine-level conditions in specific regions, worsened by climate shocks like droughts and locust swarms, layering on top of a war economy that was already failing most ordinary Yemenis. Agriculture, historically the backbone of Yemeni livelihoods outside the cities, has been hit especially hard by a combination of conflict, water scarcity, and the widespread cultivation of khat, a thirsty crop that consumes a disproportionate share of the country's already scarce water resources, often at the expense of food crops. Yemen was, for centuries before the war, also known internationally for a very different agricultural export: coffee. The port city of Mocha lent its name to the entire coffee variety still sold worldwide today, and Yemeni highland coffee farming, among the oldest coffee cultivation traditions on the planet, has continued in small pockets even through the war, sustained by farmers and a handful of specialty exporters, determined to keep one of the country's oldest industries alive. And yet geography gave Yemen one genuinely extraordinary asset that the war hasn't been able to touch: Socotra. This island, sitting in the Arabian Sea roughly 350 kilometers off Yemen's southern coast, is one of the most biologically unique places on the planet, isolated for millions of years and home to plant life found nowhere else on Earth. Most famously, the dragon's blood tree, an umbrella-shaped tree that produces a dark red resin once prized as a dye in medicine across the ancient world. Roughly a third of Socotra's plant species are found only on this one island, a level of endemism that has earned it comparisons to the Galapagos. Socotra has remained largely insulated from the mainland conflict, though it hasn't been entirely untouched by the broader political struggle between Yemen's rival factions over control of the archipelago. Beyond the dragon's blood trees, Socotra's isolation has produced an entire landscape that looks almost alien compared to the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. Bottle trees with grotesquely swollen trunks storing water against long dry seasons, cucumber trees found nowhere else on the planet, and coastlines supporting coral reefs and marine life largely undisturbed by the industrial fishing and coastal development affecting much of the wider region. Local Socotri communities have also preserved their own distinct language, unrelated to mainland Arabic dialects, along with pastoral traditions that predate most written history of the archipelago itself. A reminder that even within a single small country, Yemen's diversity runs far deeper than most outside narratives ever capture. Here is a fact that says more about a whole country's resilience than almost anything else. Despite everything, Yemeni identity, hospitality, and cultural pride have not collapsed alongside the state. Khat chewing, a mild stimulant leaf central to Yemeni social life, consumed communally during long afternoon gatherings, remains a defining daily ritual across huge parts of the country, war or no war. Traditional Yemeni cuisine, built around dishes like salta, a bubbling meat and vegetable stew, and mandi, slow-cooked spiced meat and rice, continues to be prepared and shared in households navigating extreme scarcity. Culture, in other words, has proven far harder to destroy than infrastructure. Weddings remain one of the clearest places to see that culture still functioning at full strength. A traditional Yemeni wedding is rarely a single afternoon. Celebrations can stretch across several days, involving separate gatherings for the groom's side and the bride's side, elaborate henna ceremonies, and communal feasting that draws in extended family, neighbors, and entire tribal networks rather than a small guest list. Marriage itself is still typically arranged through family negotiation rather than purely individual choice, with a mahr or dowry paid by the groom's family to the bride, remaining a central and often extensively discussed part of the process. Music and dance sit right at the center of these celebrations. The best-known example is Bara'ah, a traditional Yemeni folk dance historically performed by men at weddings and major celebrations, danced in a line or semicircle to the rhythm of drums and chanted poetry, often with participants holding a jambia, the curved ceremonial dagger widely worn across Yemen, raised as part of the choreography rather than as a weapon. Regional variations exist across the country, each tied to local poetry traditions and drumming styles passed down within specific tribes and towns. Women's celebrations, held separately in accordance with local custom, have their own distinct musical and dance traditions, performed among female relatives and guests as part of the same multi-day wedding events, preserving a parallel layer of folk performance that rarely makes it into outside coverage of the country at all. Even amid displacement and war, communities that have managed to celebrate weddings have largely kept these traditions intact, treating them as one of the last threads connecting daily life now to the culture that existed before 2014. There is no honest, practical travel guide section to offer here, and it would be irresponsible to pretend otherwise. Nearly every government in the world currently advises against all travel to Yemen due to active armed conflict, terrorism risk, landmines, and the collapse of basic services and security across most of the country. The old city of Sana'a, the Marib Dam ruins, the ancient tower houses of Shibam, and Socotra's Dragon's Blood Forest all remain on paper among the most remarkable heritage and natural sites anywhere in the Arab world. Right now, for the overwhelming majority of the world, they exist only in photographs, historical records, and the hope that a lasting peace eventually makes them reachable again. So here is the mirror. Yemen built dams that irrigated civilizations 2,500 years ago, controlled trade routes valuable enough to earn the ancient title, Happy Arabia, raised architecture found nowhere else on the planet, and unified two separate nations into one in a moment the world briefly celebrated. And it has spent more than the last decade absorbing one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the 21st century, largely out of the world's sight. It's a country that is genuinely ancient and genuinely still being fought over street by street, genuinely beautiful in what remains of its architecture and landscape, and genuinely devastated in what its people are enduring right now, genuinely resilient in its culture even as its institutions have collapsed around it. Maybe the real question isn't whether Yemen is the country the world forgot, it's whether the world ever really knew the full story to begin with before it stopped paying attention. If you learned something here, that's what this channel is for. Like the video, drop a comment with what surprised you most, and subscribe if you want more of these deep dives. There's a lot more of the world worth actually paying attention to.